Covenants are important to the ways of our being in congregation, to our doing church as a community, to our living in ways of togetherness. In 2017, I preached 3 sermons on covenant the month after I began my work as the Toledo Unitarians minister, and long before we had a video presence at First Unitarian Church of Toledo. In 2024, when bringing a new sermon on covenant, I slightly revised and recorded the 3 earlier sermons. As a companion to the 2024 talk on congregational covenants, with the help of our producer-director Walter McGee and production assistant Julia McGee, who is also the acting president of our church board, I have included the 2017 talks as bonus content. A Covenant Invites Relationship by Lisa Ward. A covenant is not a definition of a relationship. It is the framework for our relating. A covenant leaves room for chance and change. It is humble toward evolution. It claims, I will abide with you in this common endeavor, be present as best as I can in our becoming. This calls for a level of trust, courage, and sacrifice that needs to be nurtured, renewed, and affirmed on a regular basis. A creed creates a static truth, something that does not incorporate new insights and realities. A covenant is a dance of co-creation, keeping in step with one another in the flow of our lives. A creed seeks uniformity and a unison voice. A covenant seeks harmony and a shared voice. Sometimes we may arrive at a unison, but it is not required. A creed gives authority to the statement. A covenant gives authority to shared intention. A creed creates an us and a them. A covenant invites relationship. A creed is a prescription that must be relied on. A covenant relies on the treasures of shared truth. The overall trust within this covenant is in the truth, capital T, something which no one person can fully see, yet something which each and every person can come to know in glimpses, in another's story, in epiphanies. Truth is ever changing in our seeking to understand because of our limited perspectives. We grow into a deeper sense of the meaning of all things when we take our journeys seriously, with full heart and mind. The courage within this covenant is in the acceptance and celebration of life, with all of its challenges, pain, ironies, and joys. And the sacrifice within this covenant is in the letting go of dogma, of assumptions, of control, and giving over to greater wisdom which comes to us in bits and pieces. The task of this covenant is to take responsibility for the freedom we espouse. We know that we are interconnected and that what we do creates ripples of hope or despair, of affirmation or negation. What we do with and for one another is powerful and beyond our imagining. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Those words of James Villa Blake, written in 1894 for the Unitarian Church he served in Evanston, Illinois, are spoken weekly in many American Unitarian Universalist congregations, including ours. They're not just a statement of hope for peace, love, and mutual support. They're the basis of our being together as a religious assembly. We freethinkers who might admit some discomfort with a word like covenant because sometimes it is used reverently in religious circles that only barely intersect with ours. But we do live in covenant with one another, including church to individual and individual to church. Covenant isn't just a promise in pretty words. Neither is it a legal contract, but it is an intentional agreement. In this series of sermons, I am talking about covenant as our way of being together. First Unitarian Church of Toledo has a set of bylaws, but on Sundays, we Toledo Unitarians recite our covenant. It's true that the term covenant is only listed one time in the bylaws, stating in the section on the Committee on Shared Ministry that one purpose of that committee includes to help assure compliance with the church's stated mission and covenant. And the phrase mission and vision appears only twice. In the sections on purpose, the purpose of this organization is to promote the principles of Unitarian Universalism and the mission and vision of its congregation. And interpretation. These bylaws shall be liberally interpreted in order to accomplish their basic intent, which is hereby stated to be the efficient operation and management of the church in order to accomplish the purposes stated in its mission and vision statements. Mission and vision statements developed as a general business practice in the past few decades and came into use in religious institutions as well, though covenant has much more history in religious use. Covenant carries more in its concept. Covenant is important to the religious history of the Abrahamic faiths, and Unitarian Universalism has strong Abrahamic roots. It's anchored in the story from the book of Exodus on the Sinai covenant between God and the Israelites, made after they had left captivity in Egypt and arrived in the desert of Sinai near the beginning of their 40-year journey home. On a mountaintop, God gave the covenantal terms to Moses. There are the 10 Commandments, but also judgments that include, if thou buy an Hebrew servant, 6 years he shall serve, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. And if he's freed, but chooses out of love to remain with his master and still enslaved wife and children, his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. There are many more circumstances of possession, including of humans, and actions, with rules for recompense or for death, which is the automatic penalty for a witch, for example. Follow the instructions and do all that I speak, God is quoted. Then I will be an enemy unto thine enemies and an adversary unto thine adversaries. Moses put all these directions and instructions into a book and read it to the Israelites, who said, all that the Lord hath said we will do, and be obedient. Moses affirmed with a ritual using ox blood. That book is later deposited in the Ark of the Covenant, which is either destroyed or captured when the Babylonians sacked Jerusalem in 586 BCE. A very different story has the Ark ending up in U.S. government storage in Area 51 after Indiana Jones found it, but let's not mix stories. Some say an earlier biblical covenant was a rainbow in the Noah story, after God destroyed life on earth with a mighty flood and restarted with Noah and his children's families. And there's Jesus' sacrifice for the sins of all as the new covenant. So yes, covenant has a firm Judeo-Christian foundation. In our Freethinking church, we recognize that foundation, though we hope with less blood ritual and more peace, love, and mutual support. And we carry our church forward, in part with covenant. We have brought covenant into the present day, into our Unitarian Universalist ways. Article 2 of the Unitarian Universalist Association Bylaws, our Unitarian Universalist congregation's guiding words, had been titled The Principles and Purposes, and there was a move to change the title from Principles and Purposes and instead call that our covenant. The Unitarian Universalist Association Board of Trustees began developing a charge to consider revising Article 2 in 2018, and the Article 2 Study Commission convened in 2020 and developed a revised document, recommended a new article to the UUA board in 2023 with a system of values rather than the principles. After drafts and comments were shared with and gathered from the Unitarian Universalist public, and Unitarian Universalist delegates in General Assembly approved the new Article 2 by their votes in 2023 and 2024. What were the principles and purposes are now purposes and covenant, and there is much we covenant language in the revised Article 2. Peter Morales, who was the president of the Unitarian Universalist Association from 2009 to 2017, knows how important trust is to covenants and congregations. In UU World magazine in 2012, he had this to say: "We talk a lot about the centrality of covenant in our faith, about how we are united in covenant rather than by a creed. A covenant is a mutual promise, a mutual commitment. Trust makes covenant possible. I cannot enter into a covenant with someone I do not trust. Where trust is strong, a covenant is durable. Where trust is weak, words of a covenant mean little. Yet there is a strong tradition of distrust in our movement. We were born in rebellion against oppressive religious and civil authorities who had betrayed trust. We have inherited a strong anti-authoritarian streak. Sometimes that is good. Often it isn't. I have seen way too many UU meetings where we process things to death and think we have to involve everybody and her dog before making a decision. The result is timidity and lost opportunity. Together, we can do amazing things. Together, we can create the world we dream of, but we can only do all this if we learn to trust one another." Covenant is becoming even more of a church thing in Unitarian Universalism, and let's hope trust is too. Perhaps we Toledo Unitarians will join the covenantal movement. In our congregation, we've taken some small steps. You can see what is called our behavioral covenant, which was developed in 2015, and it's posted in many places in this building. It's not the more common concept of a behavioral covenant, for it doesn't address anything about what happens if someone is out of covenant, having offended the congregation by lying, cheating, or stealing, for example. and how to get back in covenant and have goodwill among us, or indicating times when there could be no welcome to return. In other words, how to covenant in times of broken trust. But ours is definitely an aspirational covenant, how we wish to be together as a congregation, what we want everyone to feel and be, and the practices and promises we commit to, which are, we will listen deeply to one another with our full attention and the gift of time, seeking to understand before being understood. We will get to know one another by name and make an effort to learn and appreciate one another's stories and viewpoints. We will acknowledge our differences, both seen and yet to be discovered, and see them as a cause for celebration rather than a temptation to ask for conformity. We will risk being vulnerable so that we can learn to be courageous together. We will be kind and gentle with one another as we learn to be courageous together. We will be kind and gentle with one another as we learn to live out this covenant. And when that behavioral covenant was produced in congregational meetings, members of the congregational signed that original piece of paper. We'll have more on congregation and covenant in this sermon series. Today, I want to be a little more general. In an article in UU World magazine, Victoria Safford wrote, "Someone said to me not long ago, covenant is a promise I keep to myself about the kind of person I want to be, the kind of life I mean to have, together with other people and with all other living things." When we welcome babies in our church, when we welcome new members into the community, when we celebrate the love of beaming couples, when we ordain new ministers, we speak not in the binding language of contract, but in the life-sustaining fluency of covenant, from covenir, to travel together. We will walk together with you, child. We will walk together with you, friend. We will walk together with each other toward the lives we mean to lead, toward the world we mean to have a hand in shaping, the world of compassion, equity, freedom, joy, and gratitude. Covenant is the work of intimate justice. Safford used the example of a promise to oneself, but covenant is a collective thing. It's an agreement between, not an imposition from. Safford wrote that we are bound by covenant, each to each and each to all, by what theologian Rebecca Parker calls freely chosen and life-sustaining interdependence. That is essential to Unitarian Universalists. A covenant is not a contract, Safford stated. It is not made and signed and sealed once and for all, sent to the attorneys for safekeeping or guarded under glass in a museum. A covenant is not a static artifact, and it is not a sworn oath, whereas. Therefore I will do this or I'll die, so help me God. A covenant is a living, breathing aspiration made new every day. It can't be enforced by consequences, but it may be reinforced by forgiveness and by grace when we stumble, when we forget, when we mess up. James Luther Adams, a Unitarian Universalist theologian, gave the major ingredients of a covenant in a 1975 essay. There are 5 points, he said. 1, human beings, individual and collectively, become human by making commitment, by making promises. The human being as such, as Martin Buber says, is the promise-making, promise-keeping, the promise-breaking, promise-renewing creature. The human being is the promise-maker, the commitment-maker. 2, the covenant is a covenant of being. It is a covenant with the creative, sustaining, commanding, judging, transforming powers, which may be interpreted theistically, non-theistically, humanistically. In a religious covenant, the orientation is to something we cannot control, but something upon which we depend, even for our freedom. Jonathan Edwards called it the covenant of being. 3, the covenant is for the individual as well as the collective. Much of the new scholarship, he stated in 1975, on the Old Testament shows how this is true in regard to the Ten Commandments. The individual as well as the collective is brought into the covenant. The individual is brought out of separateness into covenant. So it is for the individual as well as for the collective. We are responsible not only for individual behavior, but also for the character of the society, also for the love and preservation of nature. 4, the covenant responsibility is especially directed toward the deprived. Whether these be people suffering from neglect and injustice, or those who are caught in the system that suppresses them, that suppresses their own self-determination, it is the gap between covenant and system, between ideal and behavior, which creates deprivation and which makes it difficult for a top-flight executive, for example, to speak out in public regarding his or her dissident convictions. 5, the covenant includes a rule of law, but it is not fundamentally a legal covenant. It depends on faithfulness, and faithfulness is nerves by loyalty, by love. Violation of the covenant is a violation of trust. What holds the world together, according to this dual covenant, then, is trustworthiness, eros, love. Ultimately, the ground of faithfulness is the divine or human love that will not let us go. Here we see the theological basis for accountability by persons and by the church. This may be the fundamental intellectual agenda for today, a doctrine of the covenant, whether it be given that name or not. Freethinking and covenant means that we come into our covenantal relationships of our own accord as individuals and independently as a congregation. We make our own covenants, which could mean that we write them from scratch or that we use phrasing from others that speak to us. Our covenants are not creeds. They're not uniform statements of belief. As freethinkers, we make covenants that fit us and that leave openings for others to join, for some of us to leave as our life paths wind, and for many of us to stay and adjust when needed. Think about covenants and stay tuned. The next sermon is on covenants and ministry, not just my ministry, but our shared ministry as Toledo Unitarians. I speak covenantally in peace, love, and mutual support.